Hello everyone, B.O.R.G Dexter here, and today I will be reviewing Trek to Yomi, a game published by Devolver Digital and developed by Flying Wild Hog, a developer based in Poland developing a few games, most notably the Shadow Warrior franchise, the third in the series which was released this March. This is the first game I played developed by them. Trek to Yomi is a side-scrolling action game set in medieval Japan in the Edo period. It was released this May for PC, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, Xbox One and Xbox Series S and X. Now, before we get to the game, let's look at the options first. Under video you have a gamma slider, a bloom filter and a grain filter boxes to check or uncheck. I always kept the bloom on while I turned off the grain filter, which, even though it adds even more immersion as it feels more like an old movie when you play the game, but for me it got too distracting to have it on, so after a while I turned it off. Under audio there are standard sliders for music and sound effect volumes, but also an option for subtitles and for English voices. I played the game with Japanese voices as I found that more immersive and the voice actors do a good job. That being said, the English voice actors are not bad either. Now, when you hit new game, you are presented with 4 difficulty levels: Kabuki, Bushido, Ronin and Kensei, and that's easy, normal and hard respectively. The 4th difficulty, the Kensei, is only unlocked after you complete the game, and that is a one-hit kill difficulty. That goes same for you and for the enemies, except the bosses. Sadly, you won't be able to kill them with only one hit. Okay, now on to the game itself. You play as Hiroki, an orphan raised by Sanjuro, an older samurai, who is your guardian and your mentor, teaching you the way of the samurai. The game begins with the two of you training in the dojo under the watchful eye of Aiko, your childhood companion and Sanjuro's daughter. After a short tutorial where you are taught the basics of combat, such as light and heavy attacks, blocking, parrying, and dodging, Master Sanjuro is suddenly being called by a panicked villager and he leaves immediately. 無事でおれ。 Despite being told to stay, you and Aiko disregard your guardian's orders and head out to follow him.
気がかりでなりません。何があったのか明らかにせねば。されど先生は。これはお稽古よりも大事でございます。参りましょう。
Right out of the gate, you will see how movie-like this game looks. Now, when I say that, I do not mean that it has hyper-realistic graphics like games like Last of Us Part 2, but rather the cinematic angle which the camera takes and the black and white overlay that is present. The developers were clearly inspired by movies of the late Akira Kurosawa. Oftentimes you will feel like you are present in the game itself, peering at Hiroki from behind cover, giving the game additional immersion value. After a stroll in the streets of the village, which is filled with life, and collecting a few collectibles, you will begin to near the entrance of the village.
ひろき殿、愛子様へ一つ手土産でもいかがかな。拙者は、愛子殿は、その。
お顔が赤くなっておられますよ。今は先を急ぎましょう。美味しそうではございましたが。
およくれよ。少しでも足しになるならよ。そうこなくちゃ。はい、毎度あり。いいね。ありがてえ太平の世に一杯。間違いねえ。賊が森の中にいんのさ。ああ、そうさ。あの世の入り口も湖にあるな。いや、あいつらの寝床を見たのさ。俺たちが先にやらねえと皆読み食いにされちまう。脅かすんじゃねえよ。よそ者がカモシカ狩りでもしに来たんだろうよ。
As you get closer, you begin to realize that something is amiss, and find out that your village is being attacked by bandits.
Hiroki殿、拙者から離れませぬよ。先生を見つけねば。奴は村中におる。助けてやってくれ。誰か。胸に覚えのあるやつはおるか。俺だ。槍さえ持てれば。
Sanjuro is away protecting the village and fighting the bandits. You decide to follow, but tell Aiko to stay behind.
私は父上を見つけます。
いけません。危のうございます。
核のごとき輩など知りも及ばぬ。この村のすべての小道を存じています。
どうか人目のつかぬところへ。あなた様に何かあれば。
Shortly after, you face the first enemy and get a taste of real combat. Combat is sadly the weakest part of the game, which I will get into in more detail later. Attacks are pretty standard. You have weaker, faster light attacks and heavy attacks, which are slower but do more damage. You can also block and parry if you hit L1 at the right time. At the bottom left, you have your health bar in the form of small squares, each representing a hit you can take. Under that, you have a stamina bar. Blocking, rolling, running during combat, and attacking will deplete this bar. You can replenish it if you stand still in combat or if you move around. If you are being hit while blocking, the stamina will not replenish. After dispatching your first few enemies, you will come upon Kageru, a powerful enemy.
刀か。年派もいかぬ小僧の手に我が折より幼し。我が我が父を討ち取りし時よりも。参れ、刀さばきを見せてみよう。
After a short fight, you give him a nasty injury, infuriating. Just before you are killed, Tanjiro comes to the rescue, killing him but dying in the process.
何もできぬな。 わっぱを切ろうとは武士の風上にも置けん。武士の誇りなど弱く恐れ。
Now this is where the game really starts. As a whole, I found Trek to Yomi to be a decent game, beautifully presented but rough and a bit repetitive in the gameplay department. A bit more on the look of the game. You will visit various locations such as forests, mountains, and even Yomi, which is the Japanese land of the dead. You spend most of your time outdoors, although there are a few very cool looking interiors. The camera is masterfully placed, giving you amazing shots of Hiroki's adventures and the places he visits, such as shoji screens which block your view of your character, and it only gives a cool display of your shadow and that of your enemies. I really like this part. I've already mentioned how oftentimes the camera is placed in such a way that you feel as though you are a cowardly villager peering from behind the safety of your cover at Hiroki's display of his skills.
これ以上いかなる悪しき夢を見せようというのか。
The use of foreground is also very well done, with corpses hanging in front of your view in a decimated village, for example, or fences in the open fields of the countryside. Now, even though it looks great, it can sometimes get in the way of combat, obstructing your view of Hiroki or your enemies. That can be troublesome sometimes. Gameplay consists of combat with bits of exploration and the occasional cutscene in between. The game is very linear, giving you only a few optional paths to go, where you often find ammo or ammo capacity upgrades for your ranged weapons or health and stamina upgrades.
拙者がそなたを見つけられるなら、他の者にも容易に見つかるということぞ。ヒロキ殿、誠にあなた。
I've also mentioned collectibles. There are various collectibles. Some are everyday items, while others are things that depict creatures and legends from Japanese folklore. They also serve as little story bits, as their descriptions in the game will often reflect Hiroki's thoughts as he wrestles with his past and his regrets. Story-wise, the game is okay, although nothing to write home about. It has multiple endings, 3 + 1 secret ending at the mid-game. Choices revolve around 3 concepts: love, duty, revenge. You will be asked to choose multiple times which path to take. First time I chose love, but changed my mind later and picked honor. These endings offer nothing but different cutscenes after you defeat the final boss, and are not worth 3 replays in my opinion, or 4 replays if you decide to go for the mid-game secret ending, since there are no things as chapter select or manual save games, which you can load. Saving the game is done by visiting shrines which, alongside saving your game, replenish your health and stamina and give you a checkpoint in case you die. Save games are overwritten as soon as you visit the next shrine. You cannot have multiple saves. Now more on combat. Aside from your sword, there are also ranged weapons, these being throwable bow shuriken, which interrupt enemy attacks and deal some damage, light damage. Then the bow, a more powerful ranged weapon with longer range. And finally, the powerful Ozutsu, which is a gun that takes a long time to reload but kills enemies in one shot. It can also serve as a kind of a shotgun and kill multiple enemies if they are close enough. When it comes to enemies, there are a few types. The standard unarmored ones that take 2 hits to kill, the armored enemies that take a lot of hits unless you perform a stun combo and finish them off with a gruesome finisher. There are enemies that use ranged weapons such as bows and guns. Some use spears and they are a pain to deal with, as they have the advantage of a longer spear and longer reach. As you venture into the land of the dead, you will face more unnatural foes, the likes of Blighted, a zombie type of enemy that is a tougher version of the common bandit, spirits, wraiths which summon other enemies, unless you kill them before they manage to do that. Then you have enemies that pull the disappearing act only to materialize behind your back, and a few more. As you progress, you will automatically gain numerous new moves. I found that most are too complex to remember in the heat of battle. Besides, the most basic combos served me more than well enough in the entire game. Moves such as reversals are almost never used. I did the reversal only a few times during the game, and accidentally at that. I had no intention to use it. While I do appreciate that the developers mix things up, introducing various enemy types and weapons, the core of combat is a bit lacking. First of all, you cannot interrupt enemy attacks with light attacks, only with heavy ones, which take a long time to do. On the other hand, if enemies even clip you, your attack will be interrupted. Then there is the stun locking. Enemies can often stun lock you with certain attacks, especially if you are backed up against a wall. The worst example of this is the armored Blighted enemy with his head-butting attack. If you are caught between 2 enemies in a small space, you are locked. Even though most of the time, no more than 1 enemy will attack you at once from the same side, and often from either side. When it does happen eventually, you cannot react fast enough to deal with it efficiently. Sometimes the game will place 1 or 2 enemies with melee weapons in front of ranged enemies. When this happens, you are bound to be hit multiple times, as you cannot dodge incoming ranged attacks. You can if you roll, but even then it uses a lot of stamina. And if you are out of stamina, you will need to wait until it restores, leaving you vulnerable in the meantime, as you are sluggish and unable to defend yourself during this time. Instead, first you must plow through the enemies in front of them. This can be very frustrating. Your best bet will be to parry and then, while the enemy is off balance, hit him with basic fast attacks, not heavy attacks, as even then you will rarely have the time to perform them before the parried enemy recovers. The enemies appear to be always faster than you, even when doing heavy attacks. Now, I mentioned the finisher moves before. In order to do them, you will need to perform certain combos that stun your enemies on the last hit. Now what you need to do is to step away from the enemy a fair bit and press square triangle. Make sure that the last hit connects, as it will stun the enemy, leaving him open for a finisher move, which you initiate by pressing R1. If you try to perform this when the enemy is close, you will never be able to do it, because on the last heavy attack, you will always be slower than the enemy. He will hit you and interrupt your combo. These combos are practically useless in small areas, especially if there are multiple enemies on both sides of Hiroki. Now this is the problem with the numerous movesets. You should deal with specific enemies with specific moves, lest you have a horrible combat experience. which practically renders the use of most moves unpractical and useless. I forgot to mention the environmental kills and puzzles. A few times in the game, you will be able to take a more indirect path, leading you behind or above enemies. There, you will find a highlighted object which you can interact with, killing the enemies by unleashing objects in the world around them in creative ways. These things are cool and do not happen often enough in my opinion. There are also some very basic puzzles that consists of standing on a pressure plate in order to reveal the Japanese characters, that you need to then memorize and input them on a small wheel in a certain order to be able to progress further. Each time you do this, a certain object, such as a stone statue in the area, will be restored, allowing you access. These puzzles, while very basic and simple, offered a nice break in the gameplay. I liked them. As far as the music goes, it's good, but I found that it is sparsely heard. I think it could have been used more and be a bit more pronounced. When it comes to bugs, I encountered only one. I once saw Hiroki clipped to a bee. Overall, it is a very stable and well-performing game, at least on the PlayStation 5 on which I reviewed this. In conclusion, I find Trek to Yomi a decent game which could have been much greater had the combat been more fleshed out and better. Also, the story is nothing special, no interesting twists or character arcs and development. Aside from Hiroki, who is developed as a character a bit, which is reflected throughout the game with him struggling to come to terms with his past. I will not say more as I do not want to spoil it. You will see what I mean by this. Other characters are fairly bland and inconsequential, some more so than others. I feel the great movie-like presentation of the game and good atmosphere cannot pull enough weight to compensate for the lackluster combat and a mostly average story. Still, I think the game might be worth suffering through some of its more undeveloped parts, as it offers a very cinematic and atmospheric experience, if nothing much else. It is also a short game. It took me around 5 hours to complete, and the pricing is also very fair at €20 or dollars and £16 on the PlayStation Store and Steam, and is also available on Game Pass, which would be the safest way for a game of this caliber. My final rating for Trek to Yomi is a 7 out of 10. If you liked this video, please thumb it up. If you didn't like it, thumb it down. Subscribe to the channel if you liked it. This is my very first review. Hopefully it wasn't too bad and it's bearable. Thank you for watching.